Okay, this is actually my first ever Zoom launch, which might seem crazy considering we're at the end of this year, but the others are all pros, so I'm sure they'll help me if anything goes wrong. So thank you all so much for coming. This is really an amazing turnout. I even had to upgrade my Zoom account this morning to allow so many people, so that's a good thing. So microbursts was actually the first ever agent submission that Prototype received. Laura, Elizabeth and Amanda's agent, sent me the manuscript the day after I think the press release about Prototype starting went out in the bookseller. And she hoped that it might be a perfect fit, and it absolutely was. She got it so right. I didn't know Elizabeth or Amanda's work, I'm ashamed to say, but I just absolutely loved it. It really touched me and moved me and felt like something that was clearly going to resonate with a lot of people. It also had a thoughtfulness and consideration both about aesthetics and material form and collaboration, both between people and art forms, which was just a perfect example of the kind of work that I've been searching for and championing as a publisher. Microburst does what I think the best experimental literature does, and it achieves something that's seemingly simple, but in fact incredibly skillful and rare. It manages to make experimental form and hybridity accessible and appealing. And I think it really overturns the misguided assumption that experimental equates with difficult or inaccessible, and shows that unconventional forms have a function of communicating something which can't really be expressed or understood through traditional formal constraints. It also reminds us, importantly, in kind of what my interests are as publisher, that the possibilities of the book as a printed object are so much more varied and flexible and open than we're used to seeing. So tonight we're going to discuss just some of the many ideas that the book touches upon. Before we start, I'm not really going to do that much talking, but before we start, I just want to say a really huge thank you to Elizabeth and Amanda. It's been the most enjoyable process working on this book together, particularly through this strangest of years. I wish we could have had more time doing things in person, but I think we've made the best of it despite that. Yeah, it's just been a process full of generosity and sensitivity and warmth, and I'm really grateful for that. And thank you so much to Kristen for making time amidst these, the busyness and craziness of everything. And we really couldn't have wished for a better host for the evening. There will be some time for questions at the end. If you put any questions in the chat, I'll keep an eye and we'll come to those once we finished our discussion. Also, just a little sales pitch, if I may. UK postage is free till the end of the month, basically because we should all be doing this in person and you would have been able to buy a book from me. So as you can't, I'll send it to you for free if you do want to buy a copy. Okay, I'm going to hand over first to Elizabeth. I think we're going to start with a reading.
Oh, I'm going to have to share a screen, aren't I?
Moment.
Coming.
Perfect.
What we did not know. On some hills where rocks balance on inclines, there is a point geologists call the angle of no strain. Rocks repose despite steepness because all conditions allow for rest. I sleep lying down, pace upright, and when I lean, I need a wall or a chair or a person to lean against. During this first summer, we dismantle a home and forget how to talk to each other. We nearly break up more than once, and then it's autumn and we move from Scotland to Chicago, carrying 4 items of luggage, which we hope will last the 2 years we'll spend there. Our new apartment is filthy, noisy, and perfectly located for you to travel south and for me to travel north. Your train loops the loop, mine goes to the end of the line and returns. We're a closed system and there's pressure from inside and out to break apart our vicious little circle.
So, yeah, before I go into that gorgeous reading, congratulations.
Thank you.
Beautiful book. This is an extraordinary book. Congratulations to all of you. And it's a real pleasure and honor to be here and join you in the celebration. And one of the things when we were preparing and thinking about, what you might read, and we decided upon this first reading. So others won't know, but Elizabeth is reading from page 15 of the book. And what's just so gorgeous about this book is you do get towards the end. Let's see what page 107, and you get that image that we saw with the text. And after you've ventured through this whole book, you hear the echo of that earlier page 15 and the description of this rock. It's just a lovely moment that kind of flashes back and kind of holds something together, holds a process together. But one of the things to kick off and talk about is the performance of the book. So it's clear you've thought so much about this, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how the book is enacting itself.
The book, so it's what we would consider a collection of hybrid work. So I often call them lyric essays, so a form that exists between poetry and memoir and essay, with kind of like the lovely ability to use the craft from all the genres, including kind of fiction and how you might think about narrative and complicate it as well. And I came to the book because I had done my doctorate, and I'd written a draft of the novel, which was Ramshackle, and I was looking at the expanded essay form. So how we can write about difficult subjects and help them to hold their complexity so that you can embed a lot of kind of thinking into the work and convey knowledge and experience in different ways. And so that's kind of where I was thinking in terms of intellectually and creatively. And then at the same time, we had moved to Chicago, and my parents were both getting iller, and those two things kind of combined. So a lot of the essays started as notes and journal entries and had a form for the doctorate. And then that could have been the whole thing. That could have been what it was. And but the fact is that once I submitted the doctorate, it was really clear that both my parents were getting iller, and that kind of defined it. That there was a timeline there that the work couldn't force, that I had to be within the experiences. And so I was still writing, and Amanda had read various versions of it. And so it was really only after my mom died that I kind of knew that that would be the whole of the piece. And I really wanted each piece to work linguistically and create a lot of space and allow a lot of movement between, also how they exist on the page, and also the frame of it, which is an elegiac frame, but also troubled, a kind of a problematized elegy as well. And so then that's where Amanda comes in as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's interesting to use the word performativity in a text that's, I guess, started off as written. And I suppose that idea of the space around each of the pieces allows for that kind of temporal movement. And there's, like, I think just Kristen, what you said about that, the first piece that Elizabeth read with the image that speaks to that first piece, kind of towards the end of the book, or in the last kind of third of the book, is kind of important because it has that kind of link back to the ideas of grief and creativity and care and panic and crises. All of these things kind of coexist, and you can have come in and out of them. So there's that idea of movement through, although, it's funny today, I was thinking about how actually there's a real movement from that very first essay that Elizabeth's talking about, you know, like where the apartment was, like traveling south and traveling north, or something about that kind of, that movement of Chicago in this background as well, I think. So there's a whole kind of lot of different kind of internal and external movements kind of throughout the whole.
Yeah. And that image, so just to show everyone again, if you can see it, the angle of repose, I mean, this is just, it's almost diagrammatic of the book. It's uncanny. Yeah, so, well, actually, it might be useful to do the next reading, because that kind of moves maybe into the next thought to carry.
Yeah.
So the book has 4 sections, and 1 year, another year, and then between places and how she travels. So we are kind of following a vague kind of loose order, but as we kind of, as Kristen's alluding to, that they change, they don't go in a chronological order in the book anyway. I'm just going to read this as it is. I never wanted to be an old man who fell down all the time. 2nd of February, it's a flail, involuntary, the wild twitch which cuts a line out of forced stillness, the slurred steps of a shifted gait. This arm here struck out. Imagine a light held by 2 pinched fingers, if they could still pinch. Lights off, slow shutter speed, and it arcs, a yo-yo caught in the light. Light. It's not like she doesn't know. She does. This man in the wheelchair, a C curve of a back, his face expressionless, something else that goes. You can already see it, how mom stares a little bit too long, how her face waits before curving into a smile, but she knows it, and her ears, with turtles dangling, the only earrings she has here, turn red. She looks slowly. He has Parkinson's, she says. She blinks, hiding her blue eyes just for a second. And when she walks, she lifts her legs clearly until the 10th or the 11th step, when her left leg gets tired and doesn't quite clear the floor. I ignore it, and she tries to. So it's also just so great to see the pages. And again, the performance, the book performs, the pages are performing. And there we get a kind of sense of, again, this kind of movement. You know, Amanda, you were talking about the movement north and south, the movement around the loop, all of the kind of this movement of falling, the movement down the stairs, the very slowed movement of your mother in the final paragraph. And again, one of the things that this book is doing, holding, performing, is this process of grief. No, it's just to talk a bit about that charge of it. And I think one of the reasons that so the pieces themselves try to express, and essays and attempts, so that is a pair game kind of thing. They try to express that immediacy of the experience of going through a lot of that. And then what this page in particular shows is the kind of the discussion Amanda and I started having, and how the design and the layout on the page and where they are does a lot of work for, like, well, me as a writer, but for the book, with Dad mostly on the left and darker, and on the left and the top, and Mom kind of right in kind of grade, until things start changing, and they each kind of take center stage at different times as well. But through most of the book, the center narrative is kind of my experience, or experience of people around Mom and Dad. And I don't know, I know a lot of people are living through difficulty and grief, and what I would call living grief. And so a lot of this book also took form when you know that illness has moved from something that is chronic and quite difficult and has its own kind of bursts of troublesomeness, to when you know something becomes terminal. And for both of my parents, there was kind of a point for that. And that means that care that you're giving and the way that you're interacting changes. And I wanted to, it's immediate, it's crisis. This was sustained crisis, and that's really hard to sustain. And he wanted to do that and a little bit of the breakdown of those kind of experiences of not really knowing how to get everybody through it. Not that that's your responsibility, but you feel like that is. And so that's part of what we are attempting to do in the book. What I was trying to do with the writing is to express that place of illness and crisis and living grief. Some people call it anticipatory grief. I don't think that that's true. I think you're actually already living it because you know it. You know what it will be like to be without them. And you know even kind of additionally what it's like not to be able to stop them falling, not to be able to do some of the things that you wish that you could do. So that's what I was attempting to think about and to evoke. And a lot of the space on the page is about that too. There's intense pieces. It's a hard situation to give a lot of space for people to come to that and to find, I think, the beauty in that and the observation and the slowness and the stillness amidst what can feel like it's just nonstop and from all directions.
I think I came in thinking about having read Elizabeth's writing, but then trying to think about how you create these complexities, but also these different narratives, you know, because there's the story of her dad, the story of her mum, but Elizabeth's story and how that kind of intermingles in the middle of it and not, but also how her dad's story and her mum's story kind of connect as well. And there's a lot of the work and the kind of collaboration kind of came with these kind of discussions about how the pages might look. And this page, you know, in particular with the kind of steps down. I suppose that kind of, I think there's something really nice about just that one kind of page, you know, with her dad saying, I never wanted to be someone that falls down the stairs, you know, like that holds so much in that one sentence, you know, and trying to find a way that you could create that heldness, but also that connectivity with this other thing that's going on was kind of really difficult to work with. And I think, you know, I don't know if there's something about that removal of, or, you know, like I suppose the distillation from Elizabeth's initial journal entries to the first couple of stages I maybe read to the kind of final pieces as well, and how I think, I don't know, Elizabeth, you want to talk about how the final pieces kind of changed shape a little bit just because of how the book became formatted?
Yeah, it changed shape a lot. So it isn't even from the journal to the location of it within a kind of a critical component of the doctorate, which was much larger. So as Amanda said, it was definitely a distillation down, focused on the narratives, and a subtitle for a while was 2 elegies. But what the work with Amanda and that kind of real consideration of how we could give other signs and moments of connection as well as disruption because of how we put it on the page made a huge amount of difference in terms of how I could edit the pieces. So a lot of the pieces are from the original text, but they are only part of that, or they've been smushed together in a different way, and it really allows that relationality to be immediate. It doesn't have to be explained. And also, like on that page that we saw, it's so clear that you've got these 2 crises going on at the same time, and those are, you know, concurrent, and you just think that you realize how much each person needs everything, and the page kind of shows that, and then connection between, you know, the falling and the precarity of where both of my parents were and how they were moving through that and what that meant for all of us involved in caring for them and loving them. And so that kind of that on the page. And so there was a lot of like lovely, concise editing that could take place through the discussions that Amanda and I had.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm still going back to the image, the still place, the rock that's on the incline, and all these forces, like strong forces, and yet all of the forces coming together to hold this weight. And you know, both of your descriptions of this are again, kind of bringing in if it's movement, if it's relationality, because I think that's a key.
Yeah.
And I said this to you before, I'll say it to people here, but I don't know if anyone's ever been to like a cemetery when you see people's photographs on the tombstone, and it's, for me anyway, evocative, and you might look at a person's face and you can see the time wearing away on the photograph. It's quite direct, it's kind of the iconography of the person and time, and I got a sense that this book is strangely like that, except with like vectors and relations, and it is your mother and your father and you, Elizabeth, but also you, Amanda, coming in the book, and it's the brothers and the sisters, and I mean there's so much, all these relations holding this process.
And we definitely didn't want it to be, I really didn't want it to be just about my experience. Definitely, I think the way that we framed it has so much space, hopefully, for readers to read themselves into the text, for it to be something that is about all of those things. But there's such human things. There's so many things that we can interrelate to, and that we have experienced or we are experiencing. And there's even moments in terms of the intimacy of being there for those 2 years, but being more at a distance near the time some of them, both my mom and my dad, were getting ill at different times. And so also being at a distance and attempting to think about how to care for them and to make sure that things were going as best as they could, I suppose. Looking back, that you couldn't have done some things, but so there's something about that allows, the form allows for that involvement, and plus just the beautiful nature of Amanda's and the simplicity of them. They are intentionally simple. The form, like a single piece per page, aside from the one that we'll see next, and a lot of space, and then the images. They're not complicated, and they border on illustrative, but we really hope that they don't work in that way, that they really are essential to the text. And as you say, also a slow reading and a connected reading, so that they have, something that you see early on definitely has iterations later. That's definitely an intentionality of the text.
Yeah.
Well, it might be a time to move to the next reading, because I think what you've just said actually connects quite nicely to it.
Oh, yes, that's you,
Amanda. Yeah.
I thought I'm all confused. Hold on.
Let's see.
Oh yeah, it's me. Sorry. Yeah.
It's just lovely to see everybody too. It's really, thank you all for coming. We got to business real quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Move on.
Oh, that's the wrong one.
Move on.
Can people see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, hold on, sorry.
We're just holding the suspense. All of our vectors.
There you go.
Lovely.
Great. Ghost Train. In Graceland Cemetery, during the storm of a century, trees are falling down and the dark afternoon sky is lit again and again by lightning. Such August heat. It's in these bursts of light that the wind shows itself, and the purple line train on this elevated track rocks back and forth, roughly racing north through these gusts.
Thank you. Yeah, and this one, this comes a little bit after halfway through. And just so others might get a sense, like there's something really lovely about that passage, essay, and then there's a series of photographs that come throughout the book. Again, it's kind of holding this liminality. But yeah, this through image introduces another kind of pulse, another kind of temporality. So we've talked a bit about the durational quality of the writing and what it holds over time. And there's another kind of introduction of another kind of rhythm coming in here. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about time in the book, time and form?
I think it's interesting. I think that images are kind of quite interesting as well, because the images were gathered in the scope of the time of being in Chicago. You know, ostensibly we went over to Chicago so I could do my MFA. So a lot of the images I gathered were some of them in the book were for other projects. Some of them were through just actually being in Elizabeth's parents' house when it was getting cleared out. Some photographs of the house, like the cover photograph, I think was just a random photograph. I don't know how old it was and things like that. So there's something about how the images hold the life, kind of actually before and after, kind of the contents of the book as well, you know, and I think a lot of the images were just taken because we quite often, like, I think particularly the lake images were quite often taken there because that was a source of kind of solace and a break from either being downtown at the Art Institute or kind of from Elizabeth's parents' house and things like that. So there was a lot of melding, kind of just this kind of gathering of information, gathering of experience, and gathering of feelings and emotions that kind of run throughout the book, I suppose. I think there is something interesting about how there's an element of compression and containment in the book, despite all the space around it. But yeah, there's this longevity, and I think it's been interesting for us both to revisit it with Jess, but revisit it even now and even tonight, because it was such an intense period of time that as life goes on, it fades into the distance, but it's still kind of very present, perhaps.
Funny, because Amanda and I can't remember any of the discussions that we had about the book, aside from the first one, which was a long one when we were walking through the streets of Chicago after my mom's funeral, and Amanda kind of said she was interested. I know we're going to get to collaboration later, but there's something in that I think we had a lot of discussions and we made a lot of decisions, because when it came to, and maybe because I know what the next image is, when we came to then work with Jess, I definitely had opinions and they were grounded in reason. So what Amanda said about the intensity, the block text is so important because there's like this pressure at the edges. Like it was really important to kind of keep that. And there's something about like definitely the layout on the page, the relation that, you know, Amanda thought we had already placed those things on certain pages and in relation to each other. And that was to give feedback in terms of meaning, in terms of emotion, and in terms of visually, like how you are on that page. And some of them are a lot of space and give a lot of kind of room for consideration, and other ones are fragmented and breaking apart, which we'll see. And then there's one or two that's just crammed. And I think that box of text was really important, because everyone, what crisis is, you're kind of like all the energy, all the words, all the punctuation is in this space, and you're just trying to function and make some sort of sense.
You know, one word that comes up quite a few times in the titling is composite. And yeah, it's I only noticed that the second time around, but as you're talking, both of you are talking, it feels like a composite.
Absolutely. Well, if you think about essaying, that's what essaying also often is that you put lots of things together, and it is intentional how you organize them and what kind of relation that you give them by that intentionality on the page, intentional ambiguity, the kind of the directness, the clear images, whether or not you've got the two elegies. So you've got the timeline of elegy, but within that you have all this kind of fraughtness and agitation. You've got all of those things working together, and you really are trying to hold all of that to always ride the line between, as you said, being accessible. I definitely wanted a book to engage readers, like to be present, to do that. That's what we were after. And but to also not simplify it down. not to encapsulate it into really kind of quick, to make it still held and complicated and complex and all those things together. Like composite is the word.
Lovely.
And plus we were both doing stuff on maps, so that made a lot of sense in context too.
Well, I'll make one comment, and I think it'll seg into the next image. And I suppose the comment, it's bringing back your the essay, as you mentioned a while ago, to attempt or to try. And I've often thought of the essay, just that it kind of holds thought really nicely. The process of it, because it's not constantly trying to kind of rationalize it or hypotaxize or whatever one does. And it strikes me that the book is holding grief, but it's also holding thought through this really, really complex semiotic with all of this different, images and tables and texts and handwriting and objects. And I feel like that leads us onto the next image. And maybe we can bring Jess in here. Yeah. So yeah, Jess, you said a little bit at the start about your imperatives as a publisher. And I just think this is an extraordinary book in an extraordinary publication. And if you could talk a little bit about your publishing imperative a bit more, the hybridity, the interdisciplinarity.
I think the publishing world is maybe set up in a way that demands categorization, and that's the whole sort of machinery of it is such that if you go against that, then you face challenges throughout the process of selling the books, I suppose, all the machinery that involves, from the classification system of what a book is. There are literal codes that you have to assign to things, and then how you get things into bookshops, and when something, what is the single word that you use to describe this book? I can't remember what I put on Nielsen, actually. I have to go back and check. You can't just give it your fiction category, and that I think a reason why a lot of publishers are resistant to taking on these kind of experimental works is that it poses all sorts of problems when it comes to marketing and distribution, and just kind of fitting in with the demands of the industry. So there's a freedom in kind of separating yourself from those things, and it's quite a practical sort of drawing things in a way, like deciding, okay, it's the most important thing is that I have a good customer base through my own website, so that I can rely on those people to come back and be definitely interested in these kind of books, and not having to depend on bookshops who will say, well, where do we put this? Does it go in the poetry section? Or this won't fit on a shelf, where do we display it? These are all genuine challenges which make it easy to explain why publishers can't take more unusual projects on. So freeing yourself from those things allows you to work on different kinds of projects. And I think it's important that exists. It does, it brings challenges with it, but the readers are there, I think, and it's just using different channels to reach people. But I think as well that it can, for a project like this, which is incredibly personal, it can be quite a different, you can forge quite a different kind of relationship with the authors. The process is much more personal, and for certain kinds of work, that's what feels right and suitable. And and this is just a perfect example. I mean, interestingly with this one, because the book was kind of designed, Elizabeth had worked so carefully on everything that we worked with my long-time collaborator designers, Matt and Andrew. I think Andrew might be here.
Yeah, is Are you here? Because I heard a designer was in the room.
You might be here from America. Yes, yeah, he's there.
You are.
So we've worked together for many years, and I suppose their role in this project was more kind of bringing it together into a book and bringing in a different perspective to it. But as Elizabeth just pointed out, the details were very established in there for very good reasons. So it was also important not to interfere too much. So this is quite unusual in that sense. But yeah, this double page spread that we can all see is a good example of, we had to get this exactly right. This had to fit on 2 pages and, finish in those blocks. And yeah, these are just these things that you can kind of really, the detail is where the meaning comes through, I think. Where it's a pleasure to be able to really take time to get those things right.
Yeah, I like this. I'm just the reader. Who is the reader? It feels like a different imperative to who is the market.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a very good point. Yeah, which you may therefore your expectations. You're not expecting it to be in every Waterstones, and that doesn't matter. It's you're getting to the right people. Yeah, that's a nice distinction.
But one of the reasons that I wanted that we did this book, that the form of it so important, is because actually I have such a wide range of topics I'd like to read on, but what I want is just beautiful writing. I want writing that works, that is intense, that works on multiple levels, that's smart, that has a lot of knowledge in it, and yet invites me into subjects that I may not initially think that's like the first subject that I would think. So the subject is integrated into the form and what you and why you might read it, but actually it's not everything. So introduce me to something new, and that's in part the thought that I have in terms of essay. I would love, but people laugh, like just a table, just like these are just the books that are exquisitely made, that they really pay attention to the language and the image and the design, and they are beautiful things. Like this is a beautiful book. Like I'm just so thankful, Jess. You saw the whole thing, and when we said, I think one of the first discussions, like what did we want? We wanted it to be a beautiful thing to hold.
It is. Yeah.
I thought you saw it, like it was just that's what has made the process so great. You saw what was submitted, and then, as you said, kind of what kind of object it would be, what kind of book it could be.
The object is so important, and it's too often ignored, I think. The other
It's
thing,
tactile.
Yeah.
The tactile book.
For those of you who don't have a copy, it looks a bit like a kind of Polaroid photo stuck onto the front. Thank you, Andrew. This was there.
Andrew, well done. Very nice.
Beautiful. It is tactile, and it feels appropriate to its subject matter, which is special. It should be carefully done and thoughtful, I think. We're not doing a reading from this, are we?
No. I have performed it, and it did actually work really, really well. But yeah, not today. I'm going to spare y'all. It is. Well, there's Laura. Hi, my sister.
Hi. Oh, hi. You appear in the book. Maybe we could do our last reading, and pull up our last point, and then open it up to questions.
Great questions.
Yeah.
Just get it. Amanda.
Yeah. Nearly there.
Yeah.
14th of February, morning. If he can walk, if he can support his weight, if he can make it unaided to the toilet, if he can remember what it was like to be here in his house, curious, if only his favorite cereal would taste like it used to, if he could do his taxes. The world is round and the sun wakes him, often colorful before it is bright. There isn't a this or a that, assisted living or skilled nursing. It's a continuum, they say. He slides to the floor, he says. He slides on the slippery floor 12 times, maybe more. Mom is thin and her rotator cuff causes her problems. She shakes, nearly has blackouts, although she's not fallen yet. He has to sit or lie on the floor until someone can assist him. This is what we don't want. Weak sun, winter over the lake, which changes daily to ice and to water and back to a state of slush. It undulates, especially in the light at dawn. This is morning. The early start so we can make the rounds. I do not set an alarm. I am woken by worries and by this light. I keep the windows wide and wish the air through the vents was wind. Even with the window open, the world outside and inside is still. If then this, if all the doctors say his numbers are good, then why is he dying?
Beautiful reading. And yeah, just so people could, that page with the images sits next to it. And we've been talking a lot about what the book holds, the temporalities, and this is almost the logic, the reasoning, if then in suspense on this page. And I have a feeling this was a visual intervention. And it would be really great to just hear about this visual verbal collaboration between the two of you.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose for me, one of the things that Elizabeth taught me has been to read closely, and what happens when you read a text, read it again, and kind of almost, I suppose, come back to that word, kind of distilling to the kind of core elements of it. And when I was reading a lot of the pieces in the book, they kind of spoke to these other interrogations and other kind of interpretations of them. So you'll see there's one page, I think it's Legends, where actually it's the same text, but it's flipped and unreadable on one page. This piece, If, I always think of it as If, although it's not the title of it. It's funny, like, while Elizabeth can't remember how the conversations we had, I can't actually remember how I or we got to that piece at all. It just seemed to resonate in relation to just this idea of holding and these questions. And I think also that's that thing about the external calm and internal kind of turmoil, which you kind of get in that microburst, kind of intense kind of blocks that we've just kind of looked at as well. Do you know, there's just that relationship. And I think these ifs, for all the ifs in that page that Elizabeth articulated, there are so many more ifs that were and uncertainties as well. So I think freeing the ifs from what was said in the previous page, even though it's an exact reflection of, you know, the ifs are in exactly the same spot as the ifs in the passage Elizabeth read. There's the potential for all these other kind of questions that arise from all these other ifs that are happening there. And that idea of how you leave that space for ambiguity and uncertainty, I think, becomes what's important in all the spaces that are left.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Elizabeth, do you want to?
I guess, and then I think she would bring the ideas to me, and then I think some of them were fully formed, and other times we would work on exactly what that would mean and how I could alter the text, edit the text to make the form kind of even work differently or more pop a little or be more quiet. So I think that was, I think Amanda's actually a brilliant writer in her own right, and I think that attention to the text was really important. And if most of you know, Amanda knows me really well and knew my parents, and so that knowledge of that situation and her love for my family, I think, makes a difference. It means that there was a lot of things that we didn't speak about because she'd been there and she knew the text, and the images are her everyday images of experiencing life in Chicago. So they are filtered through her and then kind of enter this shared space. And so it's I think that was really important to it, to the whole process of collaboration and to how the pieces work. There's a tenderness and a knowledge, and I think an emotional presence that Amanda brought to the work, because she was there too and invested. So I'm not saying all collaborations need to be that, and I think our other collaborations may not be like this, but given that this was the text I had already written, and so that's a slightly different process. It also then very much became something that was held and shared between. And to be honest, Jess saw that really, really clearly, and I think that she understood that it was that integrated of a consideration.
Yeah, it's interesting. It kind of brings us back almost to that notion of the relational, that we started off with, and how that, that this grief is held in so much of the relations. And here's the relation of the collaboration. It sounds, Jess, I feel like you're a collaborator here as well. And we've got Andrew in the chats collaborating. All of this.
We now have Matt as well, I think.
They're both... Matt, oh, brilliant.
That's good.
Yeah. And, like, genuine respect to all of you for being able to hold just such an exquisite form with all of those voices. You know what I mean? So it feels very relational, and it doesn't feel compromised, which means that there were some really, it feels to me at least, some really good decisions and conversations that went into this.
And over time as well. I mean, it was a slow process, I think, of getting it to where it is now, and a lot of shifts and changes, I think, over time as well. And I think that kind of the time it took to get to where it is, I think, is important to the end point of the book, definitely.
Yes.
There's something about the craft that sometimes people feel things are too crafted and it gets in the way. And for me, it does both. For me, it creates an intimacy. It's like, that you're in hands that you can trust, and you build that, and that kind of craft. And that's what I think there was emotional distance, because there was a time between the illness and everything that was happening and the actual kind of the final form of the book. And I think that is, in part, was also iterated through craft, through the collaboration as well, and through a real consideration of all the elements that are going on and being able to think about them and hold them, but then also put them back together again. So it seems very simple and seems very direct, and yet it's just it's humming, it's buzzing with all of those elements, and really alive with them.
And ends with silence as it's spoken. It's a beautiful ending. I won't say it because everybody should buy the book and get it. But should we move to some of the chat? Here's some of the questions.
Yeah, I think I'll just go through that as in the order in which they appear, although we have a few related ones. But the first question was from Claire. So writing about family situations, especially ones in which care and grief bring up complicated emotions for all the people who live through it. What's it like for you sending such deeply personal writing out into the public domain? And also thinking about your family.
It's strange. I have 3 novels out there. They're fictional. They're their own things. There's a relation you can have to fiction, and this is very different. Some of the smaller pieces have been out there in the world. I've performed them. They've been published in various places, but to have the whole book is slightly different. Everybody knows that it's there. I have approval from my sister and my brother. But I think it's still complicated. Amanda's in the book. My sister's in the book. We saw her handwriting on the script. That was when my sister was with my dad at the hospital. That one, but you can see my handwriting in it too. It's like it was completely a collaborative effort in some ways. But it's my narrative. I wouldn't want to speak for anybody else. And even kind of Amanda would tell this differently. So I believe that I've done what I can, but it is my narrative and I need to kind of own it. But also I do think that it is a book as much about form and language and the way that we can bring things into the world as much as it is about that. So I don't think it's an autobiography or a memoir. It is lyric essays. They are, that translates everything. It complicates it and it holds it in a different way. So for me, maybe that allows me to also step back from it and be one of the characters in the whole book, and that is essential and important in what we intend, I think.
Someone asked a related question about whether you can ever, or whether you did ever feel too close to the subject matter and the kind of risk of slipping into solipsism.
Amanda alluded to it. It was a really hard book to write. And every time you went back, and I thought it was done with the doctorate in a way, and then I thought it was done after my dad died. My mom got a worse diagnosis that was a terminal diagnosis. And then I thought, well, it's not done. And then you're kind of living through all that crisis and you want to convey it. So every time you're writing it and editing it, you kind of relive it. I said in the videos, like grief remakes the atoms in your body. And in some ways, every time we had to go back and make decisions about the text and actively change it, you go back to that place a little bit. And so I think that was complicated. So you're both removed with the intellectual engagement and making the decisions and talking about image and how everything will work. And then at the same time, you're remembering those moments where you were beside yourself, where it was so complicated. So I think it's both, but I think that's what almost everybody does who's writing about complicated or difficult subjects. You are engaged and you want that emotional engagement, the total thin skin, and then also that thick skin and the ability to have a critical distance when you're thinking about how it will work for other people. Because if not, it just becomes a solipsistic kind of text, and really you want it. I wanted it to go out into the world and to speak to other people and for other people to be able to enter the text and get a lot from it.
And I think as well, there's always that danger, but there's also like how you create something in a ways that creates, I suppose, an atmosphere that people can relate to. That there's a kind of, how do you create work, even if it is personal, has some kind of universalism to it that people will be able to respond to. And I think there's an element of how it's crafted that hopefully speaks to that, the kind of feelings, and that kind of, if people haven't, kind of had the grief of losing their parents, there's still something about actually the fear of when that happens. I think they're, in the book, like you're waiting for this end point and things like that. So I think there's something about how you create something that speaks to people, that maybe kind of pulls you back from being completely solipsistic. Hopefully.
That's right. We all can be the judge.
Next question. Someone's pointed out that the use of the present tense in the writing, and maybe Elizabeth, you can talk a bit about that, what you felt about whether this should be present or past, and what that means about how you were creating it.
Anybody who knows me, who's ever been in any of my class, knows that I have complicated beliefs about the present tense and definitely how you move through it. In this instance, I think it goes to process, they were written, most of them, and drafts of them were written at the time they were going through it. So it is kind of authentic to the time frame in which you were doing it. And I'm wondering if there's any, or the kind of the distance between that and the editing wasn't much. There are a couple that are in past tense, but it seemed authentic and right in the moment of how and it reflected how they were written. And also the frame of the book is 1 year, another year between places and how she travels. And so it's located in time. And I think that's one of the things that Kristen's been picking up as well. And that also kind of means that you're not I wanted to give the thing itself. That's the other thing about the essay form, the lyric essay. For me, it's a primary work of art. It is the thing itself. It's not about something. It embeds everything. It makes it real. And so the present tense in this instance allows for that. And there isn't much movement. It is like you are in that, with maybe just mild reflection back on certain events that makes sense for. And there's a little bit of a date exchange at the end that was intentional as well, or at the end with the dad.
Next, a question for you, Amanda. Can you describe your emotional journey while you created the work, and were there any turning points that shaped the visual appearance of the work?
Gosh, what a question. I don't know if there was any turning points. I think it was hard. Like, obviously, when Elizabeth was, that first piece she wrote about, she was going north to stay with her parents, and I was going south to the Loop to go to school and things like that. And so there's always been these kind of resonances of time and space, and taking us back to that time when we were in Chicago. And actually, it's interesting when you read Microbursts. We had a lot of good times in Chicago too, and made some good friends, and and hung out and things like that. It wasn't kind of 24/7, 2 years worth of intensity, though it kind of felt like it actually at the time. But certainly in the process of creating Microbursts, I think there was a distance and a removal from it. And there are moments where you dip back into the kind of, the here and now of what it felt like to be there, and caring and worried and all of these concerns and things like that. But actually, when it came back to the creation of the text, it was more about, I suppose you just fell into the craft of it. You fell into being an artist, and as an artist, I make a lot of artist books. So a lot of the sensibilities that I had about kind of other work I make in terms of artist books kind of fell into my approach to looking at Microbursts. So I think that kind of removal was kind of quite an important part of how it came to be.
I'm becoming aware that we're at 9 o'clock. I feel like there might still be able to be a little bit more of discussion, but I don't want people, I know you can get antsy and be like, I gave an hour to Zoom and now I want to go watch telly. And, I don't want to be the person that kind of keeps you here awkwardly, like when you talk too long. So would you mind if can we celebrate just a little bit? Can we be like, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I think I would love to stay around and there's still questions, but just to say, thank you so much for coming. Zoom launches are bizarre and quiet. Lovely. And I want to thank Laura McDougall, who I think has not been able to make it here because her baby would not go to sleep. So that's fair enough. But to thank Laura because she saw it, Jess, in the bookseller, and she kind of texted us like, what do you think? I think this might be exactly the right place for it. And it was. Thank you to Jess. Just you saw what this book is and what it could be. And the discussions were so involving and energizing and kind and generous, and it was just so intellectually engaged and so alert and attentive to what this book was and what it could be. And Bricks in the Kiln, or Andrew, and they did just a great job of seeing that, and the cover expresses that and took what Amanda had done and really kind of brought it into the book form. Miles just changed, thanks to Olivia, who's been working and doing work for Laura as well. And to our families and to everybody who helped care for my parents and who loved them. They are here in this book, if quietly. And just thank you to everybody here too, all the thinking that has been done on forum, and that really contributes, the teaching contributes to how we can show up and do these things, at least for me. And I see all my students making comments on the side, which is just really lovely and kind of in a way. That's perfectly acceptable. And you stay alive with the writing and the teaching, and it really feeds back into what you can do. I didn't mean to end now.
Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for coming. it's really amazing to see so many people.
Yes, lovely.
Should we do a weird experiment and like turn on the microphones and do a clap? Would that be weird?
Oh,
Yes.
Okay. I'll do